I'm a bit old school with my paper. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Kegwin. That was really beautiful and so good to see there was a moment of panic when you could see that everyone was going to actually have to now apply that learning, and you all did really well. So I'm going to be talking about emotional awareness and expression, and covering what are emotions, why pay attention to them, and then a little bit further, why show emotion, so why emotional expression is important, and then ways to go about doing that. And whilst Kegwin's sharing has been quite other-focused, the thing about emotions is that we need to be able to deal with our own emotional world before we can learn to cope or hold the emotions of somebody else. And so whilst this whole lens of tonight is to be focusing on how do we help others, I'm going to be having this focus on yourself with the heart that then you can help others. Because we can't take people to emotional places that we're unwilling to go ourselves. So emotional awareness, why do we want to talk about this? So emotions are super powerful. They are very strong drivers of behavior, and we're sort of doing this. So Kegwin's been sharing about listening, and we're going deeper and deeper as we share. So I'm going to be talking about emotions, and then Liz is going to be talking about underlying behaviors and needs. So emotions drive a lot of behavior, and a lot of you will be in positions where you're dealing with other people's emotions. So our God is a feeling God. And he expresses emotion in the Bible, and we're made in his image. And so we've got to learn how to steward these emotions. So I did put up a goal. Sorry, I think I skipped ahead one. So the goal of tonight is to understand our emotions, learn how to express them in a God-honoring way, and then with the help of what Liz is going to share, address their root causes with truth and healthy solutions. So those are big goals, right? So back to focusing on why we're talking about emotions. We so often are in a very reactive state. So often we are just kind of almost like playing emotional ping pong with people. So what I'm hoping to do a little bit now is show you how we can learn to respond rather than react in our emotions, and buy ourselves a little bit of time, because underlying we have needs, and then we have thoughts, and then we've got feelings, and then we've got behavior. And so often that gap between the feeling and the behavior is so quick that it feels like it's the same thing. And so we're going to be doing a little bit of untangling. I think Kegwin also alluded to emotions being like wool, and finding language for what we're experiencing. So often in church, I see unhelpful approaches to emotion. Things like we oversimplify. So just stop it. Stop feeling that thing. Or people are intimidated by other people's feelings, and so they shut them down, or they get awkward about it. Or I've had it where somebody has shared something, and that emotion that they've poured onto you feels so overwhelming that you don't know what to do with it. Sometimes you might hear responses like, you just need to have a little bit more faith, which might not be wrong, but is not always helpful when somebody has poured their emotions out in front of you. Or you get really directive and you tell people they just need to be more grateful, count their blessings, ask them if they've prayed about it. And like I said, those aren't necessarily bad things, but when somebody's got this very raw emotional experience that they're trying to share with you, it's often not very fruitful. So, and there's this lovely quote around what are emotions. And there's signals that God uses to get our heart's attention. I have a more technical definition here. So an emotion is a complex psychological and physiological response to a situation, thought, or experience, that involves feelings, physical sensations, and behavioral tendencies. So essentially, they're signals that help us understand what we're experiencing and how it matters to us. So for the technical terms, they actually often split emotion and feelings, but I'm going to talk about them as one tonight. So typically, you experience a feeling and a body response at the same time, and then that often drives us towards an action. But like I said, sometimes that reaction is so quick that you don't even separate the two. The emotion and the action go hand in hand. So something that's important to note is that emotions in themselves aren't sinful. What we do with emotions and how we respond and how we react can be sinful, but emotions in themselves aren't necessarily sinful. They reveal what is happening in our hearts. So the scripture that often comes to mind there is how you can experience anger, but in your anger, do not sin. But so often, because that emotion is so overwhelming and loud, we sin so quickly. We can't catch ourselves in time. So the key that we need to learn here is how to be aware of our emotions and then practice healthy ways of expressing them. So another helpful analogy for emotions is that they're like lights on a dashboard. So if you're thinking about flying an airplane, which I've never done, but there's all those lights, and they're telling you what's going on with the machine, what's going on underneath the hood, essentially. And so that's a helpful way of thinking about emotions, is they're signals of what's really going on underneath. So the next slide is going to show you an emotion wheel, which I think might be a little bit too small for you guys to see. Some of you might not know that there are that many feelings in the world. So often when we talk about emotion, we talk about primary emotion and secondary emotion. So primary emotion are those inner circles. So fear, anger, sadness, joy. And then the theorists sometimes disagree on what the fifth and sixth ones are. So you can see in this picture, then there's like a peaceful emotion and a more powerful emotion. So those inner core, fundamental, basic emotions are what we call primary emotions. So, there we go. Thank you so much. So these are like the building blocks of your emotional world. And if you ask most adults how they're feeling, it's happy, sad, angry. Like, hungry maybe, well, but hungry's not an emotion. Oh, angry, yeah. So we often have very limited language for the emotions that we experience. And so then you get these wonderful secondary emotions, which are that layer outside, and they're often a combination of the building blocks. And so they're more nuanced, they're often more complex, and they're like often a blend of other feelings. So a good example there is hurt could probably be a combination of feeling mad and a little bit afraid. So that there's complex, more nuanced experiences of feelings. And what I want to just emphasize here is when we look at this is, I don't know about you guys, but often we're raised to think about good and bad feelings. And you can express the good ones, and the bad ones we don't want to hear about. And so what I want to break tonight is this dichotomy of good and bad feelings. So we've got pleasant feelings, and then we've got difficult feelings. And that is going to help you sort of start to unlock, even maybe in your own emotional world, things that you thought you weren't allowed to feel, or things that you haven't been allowed to express. And so you'll hear that I'm not even talking about negative emotions so much as I'll talk about difficult emotions, rather than good and bad feelings. So why do we have feelings? Everyone would have a different answer to this. There's no like universal truth on it, but there are like survival requirements for feelings. Like if you didn't feel fear, there would be some very dangerous things that you get yourself into. So there's like a survival element to feelings. Then there's a really strong relational element to feelings. They help us feel connected, and then there's also a decision-making element to feelings. They help guide the way that we go about our lives. And so where I'm leading this, what is emotional awareness and why do we have feelings, is I want to start growing your emotional language. So language shapes our experience. The words we use to describe our feelings influence how we experience them. So it's that classic thing of if you say that you had a failure versus you had a challenge, the language that you used frames that really differently. And the same happens in our emotional worlds. So I don't know exactly how many words there are, but the Arabic language has so many words related to camel. Okay, so this is going to sound very off topic, but loads of words related to camel. Like they have a word for the female camel that is the fastest, and the female camel that's the best for breeding, and they've got words related to the speed of the camel and the endurance of the camel. And so if you were to speak to somebody who speaks Arabic, you'll be able to know that they have a much deeper understanding of the camel than at least what I do. And that example is to show you that the amount of language we have for a concept, it actually expands our understanding of it. And so if we can expand our emotional language, we can actually expand our understanding. My husband, when I was telling this to him, he goes, okay, it's like going from 2D to 4D. But expanding our emotional language then actually expands our understanding of it. So what I would like you guys to do is we can go to the next slide. I think you might need to zoom in on this one as well. So I'm going to just need to stand in front of it. So there's two ways. If you're somebody who if I asked you how you're doing and you're like happy, sad, or angry are your primary words to describe your emotion, then two ways to really help grow your emotional language is to use that feelings wheel. And you can just Google that and print that out. I know some friends who actually just have it in their Bible and they use it as like a check-in tool in their quiet time. But this is another version of that, and it's called a mood meter. And it maps energy to pleasantness. So if you just zoom out for 2 seconds and then we can zoom in. So you can see on the left there, high energy and low pleasantness is that red section of emotion, right? And so that's frustrated, angry, frightened, apprehensive. It's when you've got lots of energy, but your mood is quite low. And this is quite a helpful map. If you don't really know where to start, you can go, okay, well, what's my energy like? Am I feeling quite energized or am I feeling really low energy? Because if you're on the low energy side and you know that your mood is low, then you're in that dark blue section there, which is lonely, sad, glum, discouraged, maybe even hopeless. And like I said, some of you probably didn't know there were this many feelings in the world. But then it makes quite a difference to say, I'm feeling sad versus I'm feeling lonely. Those are really different things. But if you didn't have the language, you might have actually lumped them all in the same category. So then if you go over to the other side, we now have the more pleasant mood. So you get the high energy, pleasant mood, and that's when you're feeling motivated, happy, energized, excited, optimistic, hopeful. But you can also have a high mood and your energy is quite low, and that's the more restful, peaceful, chilled, balanced, carefree. So then we're going to move now on to emotional expression. And I often use an analogy of so it's one thing to know what you're feeling, and there's a whole other thing to learn how to express it in a helpful and healthy way. And when I see clients, often when people come into the room, they're sitting with so many feelings that they're trying to ignore. And it's like you're trying to I don't know if you've ever tried to push like a beach ball underwater. It's like you push it up, push it down, and then it just pops back up. And it typically pops back up somewhere else. And so if we're feeling these big, uncomfortable emotions and you're feeling one of them, then maybe you could keep that down. But then you're feeling another one. And then slowly but surely, you're actually spending all your emotional energy trying to keep afloat. And so a lot of caring for people comes down to also helping them unpack what's going on for their emotion. And like Kegan was saying, listening to them and helping them identify what they might be feeling. And then like you'll get with Liz, is like, well, then where's that feeling coming from? And that's the next layer. And so expressing our emotions is something that's happening all the time. You might think that you're not expressing emotion, but it's actually popping out in other ways. And so we're inevitably going to be expressing emotion. We just need to learn how to do that healthily. So God, in the Psalms, often invites us to pour our emotions out to him. Jesus modeled emotional expression. And this healthy emotional expression prevents bitterness in our hearts. It prevents anger and emotions controlling you. So it's a really important part of actually maturing. But I'm sure I'm not the only one who can say that. I think most of us didn't come from places where healthy emotional expression was modeled, right? So it's something we've got to learn. So it's often in our family of origin, our parents do their absolute best, but they weren't modeled healthy emotional expression, and the cycle kind of goes down and down and down. And so we need to learn ourselves. So some common barriers to healthy emotional expression is suppressing emotion because of cultural norms. So classic things like men don't cry, or Christians shouldn't be anxious, or you can't show fear. So sometimes even church culture can define how we do or don't express emotions. But then often we also don't have the words for it. So that's what the vocab has been, is like we need to practice finding the language for what's going on emotionally. And sometimes it's a fear of vulnerability. We're afraid to go to places where we might be feeling these emotions. And so then there's some very negative ways that we cope with feelings, right? And if you look around, it's quite easy to spot how a lot of people are dealing with unwanted and uncomfortable emotions in unhealthy ways. We avoid them. I call this the volstruis approach, the ostrich approach, where you just hope if you stick your head in the sand, the feelings are going to go away, and they don't. We deny them, or we distract ourselves with busyness. We escape, so we comfort eat, or we drink, or we use technology or substances. We repress, which is like an unconscious process of blocking, or we suppress, where we consciously are trying to not feel things, or we ruminate, or wallow, or withdraw. And I think, so if there was any motivation for wanting to deal with our emotional lives, it's because none of those things are fruitful or godly. And so what I wanted to do is just end with some healthy ways to express emotion. And now this might seem super simple, but sometimes the simple things are the hard things to do, right? So even when I was going through this, I was like, oh gosh, okay, I really need to remember to process my emotions well. So the first step in healthy emotional processing is identifying the feeling, right? And so that's what growing your emotional language is so important for. And then it's trying to work out where that's coming from. And Liz is going to be talking a little bit about that now. And then journaling, praying through those feelings, reading the Psalms. The Psalms are super emotional. I find it really helpful sometimes if I can't find language for what I'm feeling. Inevitably, David could find it. So praying through some of the emotional Psalms, lamenting is godly, as long as it doesn't lead into wallowing in self-pity, right? And then sharing your emotions with others is also super helpful. So I've identified a few emotions with just some ideas around healthy emotional expression. So I've obviously been speaking about the difficult emotions, but sometimes we're not good at showing positive emotion either. You might be in that range where you're kind of a little bit numb. And so even showing joy. So saying, like sharing your joy or saying, I'm really proud of how that turned out, or smiling or laughing without holding back, celebrating small wins, practicing showing gratitude. So saying thank you, writing thank you notes or appreciation messages, or acknowledging other people's contributions and modeling that we can also show positive emotion. It's not always just the negative emotion we need to practice. Practicing showing love and affection, saying that you love people, giving hugs or doing something thoughtful. So the more difficult emotions, sadness, just telling somebody that you're feeling sad and asking, maybe you're needing a hug, or you're needing them to listen, or you're needing them to come around. Crying. I'm a big advocate for crying. My husband's laughing. I cry if I'm happy. I cry if I'm sad. I cry if I'm angry. Talking to a friend or family member. And then anger. This one can be difficult to learn how to express healthily. So using I statements, so owning that you're feeling angry. I feel angry when, or I feel frustrated when. Taking a pause. If you're angry, often physical activity is a super helpful way to process that emotion and get rid of like the first layer before you're able to talk about it. And then maybe the last one I'll talk to is fear or anxiety. So being able to say that you're feeling anxious is a really good start. And then asking for support. So reaching out to somebody, asking for help. And then practicing giving your needs and your fears to God. So this has just been like a quick run through of why emotions matter, finding language for them, why it's important to find language for them, and then how important it is to healthily express those emotions. And then if we can learn to do that for ourselves, then we can journey with other people and helping them do the same.